First Contact and Initial Assault. The Karvan Imperium had conquered 37 star systems without experiencing what humans would call a close call. Their warships, massive constructs of crystalline alloys that absorbed enemy fire rather than deflecting it, hung like obsidian nightmares in the skies of subjugated worlds. Every species they encountered eventually surrendered, usually after witnessing the obliteration of their largest population center. A demonstration that Supreme Commander Vorax considered both efficient and merciful. Preliminary scan complete. Supreme Commander, reported Senior Analyst Kelzer, her 4 eyes blinking in sequence as data streamed directly into her neural interface. The dominant species possesses rudimentary spaceflight capabilities, limited to their own solar system. Weaponry is primarily kinetic and chemical-based. They call themselves humans. Vorax's exoskeleton clicked as he shifted his massive frame on the command platform. The bridge of the inevitable dominion stretched before him, staffed by the Empire's finest warriors and analysts, each genetically tailored for their specific function. A pre-interstellar civilization, Vorax stated, his voice modulator adding harmonic undertones that conveyed his disappointment. Hardly worth the fuel expenditure to reach this sector. There is one anomaly worth noting, Kelzor continued, mandibles twitching with what passed for excitement among the Karvan. They have achieved remarkable developmental acceleration, from primitive flight to orbital capabilities in less than a century. Interesting, but irrelevant. Vorax dismissed. Prepare the standard intimidation protocol. One demonstration strike on an uninhabited region, followed by global communication disruption. The inevitable Dominion and its fleet of 500 support vessels moved into position around Earth, their massive silhouettes casting shadows across major cities as they strategically positioned themselves to be visible from population centers. The Karvan had refined psychological warfare to an art form. The mere sight of their vessels typically induced mass panic, societal breakdown, and eventually surrender. On a barren stretch of the Sahara Desert, a particle beam lanced down from the flagship, converting several square kilometers of sand into superheated glass and sending a massive pressure wave that was detected on seismic monitors worldwide. Demonstration complete, announced Tactical Officer Merith. Global communications partially disabled, allowing enough functionality for their population to share information about our presence, but preventing coordinated military response. Vorax settled back, preparing for the familiar pattern he had witnessed dozens of times. Panic, disorganization, and eventually, the appearance of trembling diplomats begging for terms of surrender. What happened instead confounded every predictive model in the Karvan's expansive databases. Within 24 hours, humans had adapted their communication networks, routing around the Karvan interference. Instead of fragmentation, human governments were coordinating more effectively than they had in decades. Most baffling of all, there appeared to be celebration happening directly beneath the shadow of Karvan warships. Explain, Vorax demanded, his exoskeleton rattling with agitation. Cultural specialist Zenith, whose oversized cranial cavity housed enhanced analytical nodes, examined the incoming data. They appear to be throwing parties, Supreme Commander. Our translators have decoded several transmissions indicating a phenomenon they call alien invasion parties. They are consuming intoxicants, creating artistic representations of our vessels, and engaging in recreational activities. Impossible, hissed Vorax. No species has ever responded this way. Increase the pressure. Target their military installations, non-lethal strikes only. We need to demonstrate our precision and power. Across Earth, Karvan light cruisers executed perfectly coordinated strikes against military bases, disabling weapon systems and communication arrays without causing casualties. The message was clear: we can destroy you anytime we choose. Dr. Elena Reyes, director of the hastily assembled Human Response Initiative, studied the satellite imagery of the disabled Edwards Air Force Base with remarkable calm. At 52, she had spent her career as a xenoanthropologist theorizing about alien contact. Now, surrounded by military officers, world leaders connected via secure channels, and fellow scientists, she was putting those theories to practical use. They're following a textbook intimidation protocol, she explained. The demonstration strike, the communications disruption, the precision attacks, all designed to induce psychological surrender before actual combat. We continue doing exactly what we're doing, Elena replied. We adapt, we cooperate, and most importantly, we don't act like we're supposed to act. You mean the parties? Asked Williams incredulously. Absolutely the parties, Elena nodded. And the memes, the songs, the impromptu art exhibitions. We're not following their psychological warfare script, and I guarantee it's driving them crazy. They expect terror and submission. We're giving them TikTok videos and street festivals. Meanwhile, in orbit, Supreme Commander Vorax was indeed being driven to the Carven equivalent of madness. 3 days into what should have been a standard subjugation operation, and the humans were showing no signs of capitulation. Worse, they seemed to be adapting to the Carven presence with alarming speed. They've established observation protocols for our movement patterns, reported Kelzor with growing concern. Their military forces are dispersing into smaller, more mobile units, and they've somehow determined which frequencies we're using for ship-to-ship communication. They're flooding those channels with something called music and cat videos. Vorax slammed a clawed appendage against his command console. This defies all precedent. Increase to Phase 3. Begin limited population sampling. Across Earth, approximately 100 humans were abducted by Carven scout ships, subjected to painless but thorough examination, and returned to their pickup locations with deliberately implanted memories of horrifying procedures. The Carven Psychological Warfare Manual was clear. Returned abductees would spread terror through graphic accounts of alien experimentation. What they hadn't counted on was Dr. Marcus Wong, a neurologist who had been developing a brain-computer interface when he was abducted from his Berkeley laboratory. Unlike the others, his years of working with neural mapping allowed him to recognize the implanted memories for what they were. They're messing with our heads. Literally, he explained to Elena and the response team, pointing to his brain scans. These aren't real memories. They're too structured, too consistent across different abductees. Real trauma is messy, individualized. These are programmed fear responses. Within hours, the Response Initiative had published protocols for identifying implanted memories and techniques to mitigate their psychological impact. What should have been a wave of terror instead became another rallying point for human defiance. In the skies above North America, Field Commander Israel, leading a squadron of Carven interceptors, watched with growing unease as humans gathered on rooftops to observe his vessels. They're studying us, he reported to the flagship, recording our movements, analyzing our technology. This behavior is unprecedented. Supreme Commander Vorax had never faced a failure in his 3 centuries of military service. The concept was as alien to him as the bizarre creatures who continued to defy his expectations. As he reviewed the accumulating data, a disturbing possibility formed in his strategic mind. Prepare ground forces, he ordered. We will proceed with direct military engagement. But even as he gave the command, a notification appeared in his neural feed. Human broadcasters were announcing the Carven's next move before he had even finalized the orders. Dr. Elena Reyes allowed herself a small smile as she addressed the global response team. They're adapting their tactics, which means we've disrupted their standard protocols. They're improvising now, and they're not good at it. Predictable species don't build empires by improvising. So what happens next? Asked President Chen. They'll either escalate dramatically or attempt direct communication, Elena replied. Either way, we've changed the narrative. We're not prey anymore. We're an unfamiliar problem they need to solve. As the Carven fleet repositioned for what would become the first direct military engagement, billions of humans looked up at the alien ships with something the invaders had not expected to encounter. Not just fear, but curiosity, defiance, and a strange collective determination that would soon teach the most powerful military force in the known galaxy a lesson about what actually makes a species truly dangerous: the unexpected counterattack. Supreme Commander Vorax had never deployed ground forces during an initial invasion phase. The Carvan military doctrine, refined across centuries of successful conquests, dictated a methodical escalation designed to break enemy morale long before risking valuable troops in direct combat. Yet here he was, watching through neural feeds as dropships descended toward Earth's surface, carrying elite Carvan shock troops. This deviation from protocol is concerning, observed High Strategist Thexus, whose elongated cranium-housed computational nodes specifically evolved for identifying tactical errors. We have insufficient intelligence on human combat capabilities at close quarters. They have projectile weapons and primitive body armor, Vorax dismissed, though his voice modulator couldn't fully mask his agitation. Our troops have faced far worse. The first wave of Carvan soldiers landed outside Houston, Texas, chosen for its importance to human space operations and energy infrastructure. 3,000 Carvan warriors, each standing nearly 3 meters tall with chitinous exoskeletons capable of deflecting most ballistic weapons, established a perimeter and began methodically advancing toward the city. Captain Maya Rodriguez watched the alien formation through high-powered binoculars from her concealed position 5 kilometers away. At 34, she'd served in 3 conflict zones and trained special forces in guerrilla tactics, experience that had earned her command of the hastily assembled Terrestrial Defense Battalion. They're moving in standard phalanx formation, she reported over the secure comm system. Exactly like the simulations predicted. No deviation for terrain or cover. Confirmed, replied Lieutenant Daiki Tanaka from his observation post. They're maintaining perfect spacing and speed, almost like they're drilling rather than advancing through hostile territory. Maya allowed herself a grim smile. They've never faced an enemy that wasn't already psychologically broken. Let's show them what that's like. All units, execute Operation Mosquito. Across the projected path of the Carvan advance, 500 soldiers and civilian volunteers had spent the night preparing a reception that defied conventional military doctrine. The aliens encountered no frontal resistance, no defensive line, no opposing army. Instead, they faced 1,000 small, unpredictable attacks from all directions. Improvised drones, many built by civilian tech enthusiasts, darted through their formation, deploying not bombs, but highly concentrated pepper spray and industrial adhesives that gummed up the joints of Carvan exoskeletons. Autonomous vehicles swarmed around their flanks, not as weapons but as distractions, forcing the rigidly organized aliens to constantly reassess threats that never materialized into direct assaults. Most disorienting of all, the humans refused to follow any recognizable combat protocol. They struck without warning, then disappeared before retaliation could be organized. They targeted not the Carvan commanders, but the communication specialists, creating isolated pockets of confused alien troops. On the inevitable Dominion, Vorax watched with growing horror as the tactical displays showed his perfect formation disintegrating into chaos. "This isn't warfare," sputtered Tactical Officer Merith, mandibles clicking in agitation. "There's no honor, no direct engagement. They're treating our elite warriors like nuisances." "It is warfare," contradicted Zenith, the cultural specialist. "Just not our definition of it. They're adapting tactics from their own history. Guerrilla warfare, asymmetric engagement, fighting styles they developed against each other." This revelation stunned the command bridge into momentary silence. The concept that warfare could evolve from internal species conflict rather than standardized combat protocols was alien to the Carvan, whose society had been unified under imperial control for millennia. On the ground, Field Commander Telrax, leading the Houston invasion force, faced a decision unprecedented in Carvan military history: retreat or risk complete disorganization of his forces. His training offered no protocol for this scenario. Requesting immediate extraction, he finally transmitted, a communication that sent shockwaves through the command hierarchy. As Kargan dropships descended to retrieve their beleaguered ground forces, Maya Rodriguez gave her final order for the engagement. Let them go. Make sure they see we could have inflicted casualties but chose not to. The human restraint confused the Karvan even more than their unconventional tactics. In the command bridge of the inevitable Dominion, Vorax faced the greatest challenge of his career, explaining to the Imperial Overseer how a pre-interstellar civilization had repelled the Empire's elite forces without deploying a single conventional military unit. The humans display behavioral anomalies that defy our predictive models, he reported, struggling to maintain composure. They adapt rapidly, coordinate efficiently despite our communication disruption, and employ combat tactics that prioritize disruption over destruction. Are you suggesting we cannot subjugate this world? The Overseer's holographic form loomed ominously. I am suggesting, Vorax chose his words carefully, that standard protocols are ineffective. We would need to deploy overwhelming force, planetary bombardment at minimum. Unacceptable, the Overseer dismissed. The Imperium requires intact infrastructure and population for resource extraction. Find another solution, Commander, or be replaced. As the communication ended, Vorax faced his command staff, each member awaiting direction with growing uncertainty. The Empire that had never known defeat was facing not just military resistance, but a complete failure of understanding. They do not fear us, Zenith observed, stating the unthinkable. Not as they should. Then we will make them fear us, Vorax decided. Prepare for simultaneous strikes on 3 major population centers. Minimal casualties, but maximum infrastructure damage. What Vorax couldn't know was that Dr. Elena Reyes had anticipated this exact escalation. Working with international teams of scientists, engineers, and military strategists, she had developed what would later be called the Adaptive Defense Network, a system for predicting Karvan responses based on their observed behavioral patterns. They're rigid thinkers, she explained during an emergency session of the Global Response Team. When confronted with failure, they don't innovate, they intensify. Their next move will be precisely calculated to restore their psychological advantage. How can you be so certain? Demanded General Williams, who had become a reluctant convert to Elena's approach after witnessing the Houston engagement. Because their entire society is built on hierarchy and dominance, she replied. They don't just want to win. They need to win in a very specific way that validates their worldview, and that's their fundamental weakness. When Karvan strike forces targeted New York, Shanghai, and London simultaneously, they encountered not panic but preparation. Civilians had been systematically evacuated from vulnerable areas. Decoy targets had been constructed to draw alien fire. Most critically, humans had deployed a hastily assembled array of electromagnetic pulse generators specifically calibrated to the operating frequencies of Karvan weapon systems. The result was not just a repelled attack, but a catastrophic failure of Karvan offensive capabilities. 19 strike craft crash-landed with disabled systems. 37 Karvan soldiers were captured, the first prisoners ever taken in the Empire's long history of conquest. Captain Rodriguez, now coordinating global tactical response, observed the captured Karvan with professional interest. They don't know how to be prisoners, she noted. Look at them. They're waiting for execution, not interrogation. Dr. Marcus Wong, who had developed a rudimentary translation algorithm based on intercepted Karvan communications, approached the highest-ranking captive, a sub-commander whose neural implants marked him as part of the Tactical Planning Division. We don't want to destroy you, Marcus explained, the translation device rendering his words into the clicking, harmonic language of the Karvan. We want you to leave. The sub-commander's response, when translated, revealed the fundamental misunderstanding that had doomed the invasion from the start. Impossible. Inferior species submit. This is the natural order. On the inevitable Dominion, Supreme Commander Vorax faced the unthinkable, a formal request for parley from the humans, transmitted on Carven frequencies using their own communication protocols. They're offering to return our captured personnel in exchange for our withdrawal, reported Communications Officer Drillna, clearly struggling to process this unprecedented development. A trick, Vorax insisted, though uncertainty had begun to erode his conviction. No species has ever captured Carven soldiers. No species has ever responded to our invasion protocols with adaptation rather than submission, countered Zenith, who had been intensively studying human behavior patterns. They don't think like us, Commander. They don't share our assumptions about conquest and dominance. The pivotal moment came when human broadcasters worldwide simultaneously aired footage of the captured Carven soldiers, not being tortured or executed, but receiving medical treatment for injuries sustained during their crashes. Most disturbing to Carven sensibilities, the footage showed humans attempting to accommodate the aliens' biological needs, providing them with synthesized nutrients compatible with their physiology. "They're treating our warriors with respect," whispered Kelzor, giving voice to the collective shock of the command staff. In that moment, Supreme Commander Vorax experienced something entirely new in his 3 centuries of existence: doubt about the foundational principles of Carven imperial doctrine. If humans could adapt this quickly to an existential threat, coordinate global resistance without centralized command, and still maintain ethical treatment of enemy combatants, perhaps the natural order the Empire had proclaimed throughout the galaxy wasn't so natural after all. "Open a communication channel," he finally ordered. "I will speak with their leaders." The subsequent negotiation between Supreme Commander Vorax and the hastily assembled Earth Diplomatic Council represented the first time in Carven history that the Empire had engaged in dialogue rather than dictating terms of surrender. "You must understand," Vorax explained to the assembled human representatives, his image projected in conference rooms around the world, "that no species has ever resisted us as you have. Your tactics, your adaptability, they are unknown in our experience." "That's because you've never encountered humans before," replied Dr. Elena Reyes, who had been selected as chief negotiator based on her understanding of Carven psychology. "Our greatest strength isn't our technology or even our military capabilities. It's our diversity of thought and our capacity to change." As the Carven fleet finally withdrew from Earth orbit 7 days after their arrival, Supreme Commander Vorax submitted his final report to the Imperial Overseer, a document that would eventually transform the Empire's approach to expansion. "The humans represent an evolutionary path we have not previously encountered," he wrote. "Their strength lies not in unity of purpose or technological superiority, but in cognitive diversity and adaptive response. They do not fear difference, they cultivate it, and in doing so, they have developed a form of resilience that our standardized approach cannot overcome." On Earth, as celebrations erupted across every continent, Dr. Elena Reyes stood quietly at her office window, watching the last Carven ships disappear into the night sky. "They'll be back, won't they?" asked President Chen, who had come to personally thank the woman whose insights had saved countless lives. "Not as conquerors," Elena replied with quiet conviction. "As students, perhaps. They've just encountered something their entire civilization has never experienced, the need to change their fundamental assumptions. That's a powerful lesson. In the decades that followed, humanity's place in the galactic community would be shaped by that first contact, not as another subjugated world in the Carven Empire, but as the species that taught the universe's greatest military power that true strength comes not from dominance, but from the ability to adapt, to innovate, and most importantly, to recognize that different doesn't mean inferior." The Carven would eventually return to Earth, not with warships but with diplomatic vessels. And Supreme Commander Vorax, now serving as Imperial Ambassador, would often remind his colleagues of the critical insight that had transformed their civilization. The humans survived not because they were stronger, but because they had never stopped learning how to survive. Against nature, against each other, and ultimately, against us.